Welcome to Women's Sports Weekly, where women's sports happens every day, but we talk about it once a week. I'm Danielle.
And I'm Carolyn. Women's Sports Weekly is a podcast where we discuss the latest news, explore interesting stories, and share our love for women's sports. Follow us on Instagram at Women's Sports Weekly Pod. Okay, Danielle, in watching women's basketball over the past couple weeks, we've been seeing a lot of pink on the floors, a lot of the players in their pink jerseys. I know a little bit about it, but I also know that when you were in college at Moravian, you and your team were very active in the Play4Kay game. So can you tell us a little bit about it and what it meant to you?
Yes, I've definitely been feeling really reminiscent watching all these Division I games on TV, seeing the players in the pink uniforms. It brings me back to when I played at Moravian College, which is now known as Moravian University. It was always a big deal on campus, and the Play4Kay game was the game we really looked forward to the most each year because we knew it was going to be the day we get to wear our pink jerseys. We always got a ton of fans at that game, and the alumni would come back because it would also be the alumni game day.
That's so fun. Were you the type of players who would get ready in the locker room and like put on makeup before games?
We would wear makeup, not a lot. We used to get yelled at for getting marks on our jersey, on our white jersey for the makeup, so we tried to limit that a little, but you know, look good, feel good, play good was the motto, so we tried to look okay, especially for the pink out. We even took it as far as we would dye a strip of our hair pink each year underneath on the underside of our hair.
Wow, how did that go?
It was fun. It would always be like a team, just fun thing to do. I don't know if we would do it the night before the game or a few nights before, but we would bleach a strip of our hair and then put the pink dye on top of it, and it would literally stay there until it grew out, and a bunch of us would do it.
That's really funny. I can just imagine like a bleach gone wrong, but it sounds like that never happened.
Yeah, no, and we would also either get tan. We would go to get tanned or use spray tan the night before the pink out. You know, it was just one of those things. Everyone was trying to look good for that day. And like I said, alumni would come back. So the players during the morning would do their shoot around and then come watch and heckle the alumni players. And it was really fun. As a player, I used to think those alumni were like famous back then, if that tells you anything about me. I was very nerdy and thought it was so cool to be meeting former players and players who I used to look up to when I would go watch the games when I was in high school.
And I think that says a lot about you and your respect for the game. Like, you didn't just come in and think you were hot shit. You knew the history of the people who played before you. So I think that's really cute.
Yeah. And then when I was an alum, it was really cool to see the players who are currently there. And as you know, I coached 3 years at Moravian. So took a year off, taught for a year, and then came back. And as I was getting my master's as an assistant coach, really saw the work that went into it behind the scenes of raising the money that we raised. Because at the end of the day, the point of this was to raise money for breast cancer research. And as of last year, Moravian has raised the most money in Division III for 15 consecutive years. And just to give you some background there, they raised over $18,000 alone just last year.
That's amazing for a Division III school, a smaller school. But I've been to the pink out games at Moravian, and the amount of time and the amount of effort that's put in, it's very evident that they're going to be raising a lot of funds for the KYAL Cancer Fund. The KYAL Cancer Fund is a nonprofit organization dedicated supporting the research and fighting of all cancers, which is really great. So although we're wearing pink, we're talking about breast cancer, that money is going to researching cancers that disproportionately impact women. KYAL was a coach at NC State. She was an amazing coach. They went to 20 of 27 NCAA tournaments when she was there, 11 trips to the Sweet 16, trip to the Elite Eight, and also to the Final Four. So very, very well known, a great coach. And she was diagnosed with breast cancer back in 1987. She fought it for 20 years and passed away in 2009. I think this, again, really speaks to that basketball. When we talk about sports, when we talk about women's sports, it is more than just a game. And some people want basketball players just to play basketball, or they want the player to not have feelings or emotions about anything else. But these things that come up in our lives, I think it's so amazing to have players get involved. I think it's amazing that Moravian gets involved and fosters this idea that all athletes should be doing more than just their sport. They should be contributing back in some way. And I think Moravian does a really, really good job with that.
And I know Coach Spurk, who I played for, had a KYOW signed picture in her office. And I know the reason, obviously, she led the way with our team raising money, and it was a big deal to her. She lost people close in her life to breast cancer. So it is more than just a game. And each year we were reminded of that during the Pink Out. And yes, everything around it is so fun, but you also have to remember what it's all about. We would have raffles at the game. A ton of people would show up. And then after the game, later that day, we would have a reception and all the alumni would go and current players and their families. So really just a great cause.
Definitely. And all of these teams now play their KYOW game, their Play4Kay game. They wear their pink. The right way to do it is to make it fun like Moravian does, to have a whole event around it so that the most amount of money can be raised and that the students get excited, the student athletes get excited. Like that was your favorite weekend of the year. So
yes,
really, really cool to see teams coming together, athletes coming together, coaches coming together, the community coming together to raise money for this.
Yes, and it was also just a great excuse for more fans to come out to our game maybe than usual, and that just makes it a great day for the players as well. So I definitely missed not going this year. I know it was this weekend and my friends were there and they all had a lot of fun. So I'm missing everyone and just glad to see they continue to do that.
And hopefully they have the most amount of money in Division III again this year. February is Black History Month, and we are going to continue to highlight some Black history stories in women's sports. Danielle, what do you got for us?
The person I want to highlight this week is Briana Scurry. So when I was a kid, she was on the U.S. women's national team, and I looked up to her. She was a goalie, and I was a goalie. So seeing her play was really cool for me back then, and I'm pretty sure I did a school report on her at some point.
That's great.
I became a goalie in middle school, so probably a middle school report. Her U.S. women's national team career lasted from 1994 to 2008. And in her career, she featured a World Cup win and 2 Olympic gold medals.
Wow.
Yeah. Some other highlights. She was one of the few African-American players on those 1990s U.S. women's national team squad and has been an open member of the LGBTQ plus community since those days as well.
Which is really ahead of her time.
Right. Like early 90s. Can't imagine what that was like back then to be out. She was the primary goalkeeper on the 1996 Olympic team that won the first ever gold medal in women's soccer. One of the things she was known for back then, she made a historic save in a shootout in the 1999 World Cup final. And that really put women's soccer on the map in the U.S. that year. And to be able to save one is just the coolest feeling in the world. And to do that at a World Cup, I just really envy that. That must have been the coolest experience.
And to represent your country too. And the other thing that I think is really interesting about her is that she suffered from a traumatic brain injury while playing in the professional league here in the US, and she had to retire afterwards.
Yes, she did. She had to retire in 2010 after suffering a concussion.
That was like kind of unheard of at that time. And also they weren't giving her the treatment that she needed. She kept saying something's really, really wrong. Something's really, really wrong. She was having to fight for workers' compensation after that. That is crazy.
Yeah, I think generally back then too, concussions were not really taken seriously.
Yeah. And I read that she had to pawn off her 2 gold medals that she earned. Can you imagine?
No.
To get the treatment that she needed because she did not have the money to cover it. And this is an Olympian who won for our country. This is someone who played a professional sport, and they were at a point where no one was listening to them, and they were trying to seek medical treatment, and they had no medical coverage, that they're selling their medal.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And that makes sense knowing all the trouble she went through, because after her retirement, she has become an advocate for concussion awareness because clearly she knew how important it was for other people to understand the dangers of concussions and needed to spread that awareness.
we talked about this a little bit last week. These women are put in these situations where many people would give up, and they just continue to persist on and continue to make a difference. It's just really amazing to see.
And in 2017, she was elected to the National Soccer Hall of Fame for all of her accomplishments throughout her career. And she was the first African-American woman to receive such an honor, which is also amazing. And became a founding member of the world's first paid professional women's league in 2000 off the back of the World Cup win. And that league was known as the WUSA. It only lasted 3 seasons, but it eventually paved the way for the NWSL in 2012. So for her to be a founding member that eventually led to a larger league, it's very cool to be able to be a part of that.
Yeah. And did you get all your information for today's episode from your old report?
I wish I could dig that up somewhere and find it. I would love to see what that report looks like now, looking back on it. She's still involved in soccer as of a few years ago. When Trinity Rodman was a rookie, she became a mentor to her. And Trinity Rodman had said, it's important for me to be able to look up to a person of color who has also played soccer and paved the way.
Asia Wilson just released a new book, and one of her quotes is, "If you can see her, you can be her," and that's just exactly what she represents.
Briana Scurry, really cool. I saw her live once as a kid as well. They were playing.
You left that out.
I know. I forgot to mention that in the beginning. I believe it was at, I want to say MetLife, but I don't know if it was where the Red Bulls played. I can't remember, but I remember seeing her play live as well and just freaking out. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
All right, Danielle, let's go into our other highlights from this week. What do you got?
So first off, one thing that I mentioned last week that I was excited for this week was the South Carolina versus UConn game that was played this weekend. South Carolina, who you and I were rooting for, won 83-65. Pow Pow, just shout out to her because she had a really good game, scoring 21 points.
She was on fire in the first half.
Yes. So always fun to see when a certain player just breaks out and has a great day. I know you and I had conversations about this. I was a little nervous with Camila Cardoso not playing because she was playing for the Brazilian national team and missed the game.
I was nervous about it, and they looked great. I mean, their bench is just so deep. I feel like I want Camila there. I want Cardoso there. But they still played amazing. And they beat UConn this weekend, and it was a proper beating.
Yes, almost a 20-point game. So that was fun because we're Go Gamecocks. And shout out to my dad. His South Carolina shirt is in the mail, so we'll have to be posting a picture of him wearing his South Carolina basketball shirt.
I'm sure he'll be so excited to throw that on.
I really can't wait. And then just another point about Cardoso not playing, it just goes to show how good of a team South Carolina is overall. Chloe Kitts, who's been starting games, and then Ashlyn Watkins, who doesn't typically start. Between the two of them, had 29 points, and they played really well. Ashlyn Watkins, I also felt like just broke out of her shell a little bit. She's been playing great all year, don't get me wrong, but I just felt like her energy was a little different today, making those blocks and scoring a lot. So fun to see her get to start and just watch her play a great game as well.
Ashlyn Watkins is one of my favorite people to watch on South Carolina. Her blocking ability, like a block to me, is one of the most fun things to view as a spectator because everyone gets hyped up about it, and she is so good defensively.
The other game we were watching, and it was hard to watch both games because Iowa-Nebraska game was playing. They started an hour early, but the games obviously overlapped. So we were switching the TV back and forth between the Iowa-Nebraska game. Going into this game, Caitlin Clark was 39 points away from breaking Kelsey Plum's current record. And as a reminder, the scoring record currently is 3,527 points. I just feel like there's a lot of weight on Caitlin Clark in general. And going into the fourth quarter, she had 31 points.
This was the first time, and I didn't even see it in the beginning of the game. I saw it towards the end of the game, that I saw Caitlin Clark pressing a little bit to get there. Iowa lost 82-79 to unranked Nebraska. I mean, not what you want to happen. And it was almost difficult to watch because you could see not only Caitlin Clark pressing a little bit, but the whole team was pressing. And Caitlin Clark is amazing, and I think she's been handling this so well. And I wonder if after the game over the weekend against Nebraska, if she's like, I just want to get this over with. Like, I just want it to be done.
I'm sure. I don't know if I agree with her pressing. I thought she was playing within herself. I think her not scoring the whole fourth quarter was kind of mind-blowing to me, and you could just tell it was Nebraska's mission to not let her score. I think the shots at the end or did you say beginning of game, you felt like she was pressing?
No, I think towards the end of the game.
Oh, yes.
Beginning of the game, I thought she looked great.
I misunderstood what you were saying. Because the end of the game, I also think, though, part of that was she realized, oh, crap, we are when Nebraska went up, I think I saw her panic a little. Like, yeah. I don't know if she was just trying to not press. Like, her passes were great.
Yep.
I mean, my God, she reached 1,000 career assists today.
Yes.
And I forgot to mention that at the beginning. Like, you have this huge scoring record on the line. Oh, and you also just hit the 1,000 assists for your career. That's an incredible stat.
Yes. And you're ranked number 2, and you're playing an unranked team at their home court. And it seemed like Nebraska, they were taking it personal, which I think is sometimes great. They were like, you're not scoring it here.
Yep.
And you're not going to score so much that we're going to somehow pull out and win this game when the majority of the fans here are probably Iowa fans.
Another great point, Super Bowl Sunday, over 15,000 people were in the stands of that game.
It's really cool. I feel like we're at this part of history where women's sports, especially women's basketball, is just skyrocketing.
Yes.
And Caitlin Clark has a lot to do with it. And she is an amazing player. And she's going to hit this record.
Yes.
She's probably going to hit it.
Knock on wood. She needs to stay healthy.
Yes. Very true. And I think Kelsey Plum has been great about it too, where she's like, yeah, that was like such a low point in my life. I'm happy that record is getting broken, and records were made to be broken. And I've always admired that about you. If we were going to go back into high school, Danielle, you set quite a bit of records at your local high school for scoring. Those records were recently broken.
Within a few years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And you were notified about it, and you were like, yeah, records are made to be broken. How can I get there? How can I be there? And I just think that's the right attitude to advance the women's game. I also think in our society, it's always like there's this idea that women are catty or want to take each other down, and it's just not who we inherently are. And Kelsey Plum so clearly shows that, and you do too.
Yeah, I remember when I was close to scoring 1,000 points, just the pressure I felt in high school. So there was, when I got to the 28 points away mark,
yeah,
I remember just feeling this immense pressure because, of course, I knew before that I was getting close. But I've had 30-point games before. So 28 points, I was like, okay, this could happen in the next game. That next game was the first game in my entire high school career that I scored 0 points.
Yeah.
And I know it's not the same. I'm not Caitlin Clark. I do not have the amount of pressure that she has. People all over the country know who she is. But me being in high school, just close to scoring 1,000 points, I felt that pressure on myself. So I just can't imagine what she's going through. I think a lot of people like to hate on her because she's the best. And of course, men's, women's, whatever sport you're looking at, people are going to love and hate the best player out there. Yes. I think that's natural. And sometimes I get defensive because I'm like, no one else is doing what she's doing. And she's handling it for the most part with grace. I mean, we've talked about it this year. We have seen her get a little chippy in some games. But heck, if my college games were on TV from when I was in college and played, people would probably say similar things about me. I wasn't the most graceful person all the time on the court. If I got upset or someone was pissing me off, I let them know it. And for her to be in a national spotlight and have to deal with that, I just try to remember, like, she's 22 years old also.
We're always, especially when we're talking about college sports, we are talking about young kids.
Yes. And they're adults, but also when we're how many years out of college?
Yeah. I don't want to talk about
it. Okay. But yeah, we view them, we're like, yeah, they're just kids on this national platform, and we have to give them grace. Like I said, she has to stay healthy, but she's 8 points away. going into this week, the next game they play is on Thursday.
Yep.
Just hoping she gets it so that can get out of the way. And to your
Yeah.
point earlier, Kelsey Plum is like, yeah, I wouldn't want to be in those shoes again.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Caitlin right now just wants it to be behind her so she can move forward with the season.
Yeah, and focus on winning games, right? Caitlin Clark is a baller, and at the end of the day, she wants to win games and she wants to go to a national championship. Right. I think that's actually what's most important to her. And to see this pressure, I honestly just feel bad because I'm like, you're going to get it.
Yeah.
Let's just keep pushing forward and you're going to get those points, and then this will all be over and you can focus on what's actually important to you and your team.
Yeah. And for people who just see her stats and don't actually watch, like, her passing is amazing.
Yes.
She makes the players around her better. And I think that's just such an important thing to remember, that she's all around a very, very talented player.
The other thing that I wanted to mention about Caitlin is I think it's really a good sign that people are having the conversation about whether they love her or hate her, because for so long, especially in the women's game, when someone was really good, we all just kind of got behind them, pushed them forward. But I think it says something that we're having this discourse now. I think it puts us more in line with how we talk about some of the men's players. Like, you either love them or hate them. I do think there's some underlying sexism sometimes about her records not really meaning anything, but I think it's a really, really good sign. And I also think that Caitlin Clark has what I see in Kobe, like, people who play her hate playing against her because they know that she's going to trash talk. She's going to make it very difficult for you. She can dish it and she can take it. And that's one thing I give her a lot of credit for.
Yeah, absolutely. That also just makes me think the best comment I've heard, and I forget his name, by a sports broadcaster say, Caitlin Clark is not overrated. The West of
the West of women's sports.
Caitlin Clark is not overrated. The rest of women's basketball and women's sports is underrated.
Yes.
And that's where we need to continue to do the work and make it known that women's sports should get more attention than they do.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit to tell you about my highlight. So softball started this week, NCAA softball, and there were a ton of games going on. I want to specifically talk about UNC Charlotte beating number 4 FSU, Florida State University. FSU was in the World Series last year. They lost to Oklahoma. They are stacked. Most notably, they lost their ace pitcher, Catherine Sandercock. What a name. But she was their ace. She's a standout. She graduated. For UNC Charlotte, Sam Gress pitched 6 innings. She got the W. They played 10 innings and beat FSU. What I love about softball is that anything can happen on any day. And it's still way too early to see how everything shakes out. But to have an upset this early in the season, I think, is a great sign. The next day, or maybe the same day they played FSU again, they got killed. They got killed like 11-0. In softball, you play so many games. And so it's interesting because these games now in the early season, it's like hard to kind of pick out what actually means something and what doesn't. When ranked teams are getting beat by unranked teams, I just think it's so much fun. I'm always going to root for the underdog unless they're playing South Carolina.
Of course.
And to see them just show up on a day and say anything can happen and win in 10 innings, it was really, really cool. So I just want to shout out a Gamecock alumni, head coach of UNC Charlotte, Ashley Chastain, who is the head coach. And what a fun opening weekend. No matter what.
Even watching the Nebraska coach after the Iowa game today in tears on the TV, like, it is a huge deal when you beat a ranked team and you're not ranked, and just to show the country that watch out because we could be really good this year.
And similar to women's basketball in the beginning of the season, a lot of teams like play some lower ranked, unranked teams to try to cushion their record just a little bit, get them off to a good start. So to see this, I think is a really good sign for softball this year. And what I do like about softball and their ranking system is that they use a power ranking system. They do strength of schedule. So everything kind of is in an algorithm.
That's awesome. I am amazed by softball in general at the college level, how many games they play, to your point, because I played in high school and every time a game was over, I was drained. Like, those games are long. It takes a lot of energy. I understand you're not maybe running the same amount as like in basketball or soccer, but that is a long day to be playing multiple games in a day or in a weekend.
And I think especially for the pitchers, like if a pitcher is going more than 4 or 5 innings, that is becoming less and less common. Like to see pitchers throw full games or go through an order more than twice. There's definitely a change in the dynamics of softball where these pitchers are not coming in as often, throwing full games because the batters are just too good. And if they get around 2 or 3 times, it's just going to start to get ugly. So the game is definitely changing in that way as well.
I'm excited for softball season and definitely excited to watch some games.
Okay, Danielle, let's transition into like our outside the lines portion of the show where we don't discuss particular games. We talk a little bit about women's sports and what's been happening.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Okay. I'm nervous because this has to do with Danielle getting upset with me. So we went to the gym the other day and we were having a conversation as we were warming up in the gym. And I won't tell it yet. I'll let you tell it. But we got into the car and you looked over at me and you said, I am so mad at you. And I was like, oh no, what did I do? And I was like, why? What happened? So please tell us why you were mad at me this week.
Yes. And it probably should have been framed as I was mad at the situation, but I was taking my anger out on you in that moment because I don't think you get as angry as I do in certain situations. Like that's usually my reaction to certain things. But have you ever seen like Red?
Yes. Well, I've actually seen you see red.
And this is going to make me sound like a psychopath, but I was at the gym like feeling like I was seeing red while this conversation was happening.
And the difference between you and I is when you get angry, you see red. And when I get angry, I just cry.
Yes. And I was seeing red and not speaking. So yes. No one could actually tell I was upset with the conversation happening. So what happened was we somehow started talking about women's basketball. I think because there was Super Bowl talk going on and you had mentioned your Super Bowl was the South Carolina versus UConn game that was happening on Sunday, that you were more excited about that, which I loved. Then it started getting into Iowa because another person from the gym was actually going to the Nebraska-Iowa game today because she's an Iowa fan.
And was hoping to see the record be broken.
Right. And I can already tell that you are going to have words because you just love to hate on Iowa.
I do love to hate on Iowa.
I guess where my frustration comes in is when we're in a room full of people who don't really care about women's sports or necessarily know anything about women's sports. To me, it's like a dicey road to go down when certain things are said. So obviously the one woman in the gym who was going to the Iowa game, big Iowa fan, she knows women's basketball. She clearly supports women's basketball. But there were also people in the gym who might not be as educated on women's basketball or women's sports in general. And I think the conversation started to go of Iowa gets all this attention. They would be nothing without Caitlin Clark. This
was me saying a lot of this.
Carolyn started off by saying that. And then there was another person in the gym that said, it's just so interesting, the discrepancy between the few best players in women's basketball and everyone else.
Yes.
And that's when I started seeing red.
And I disagreed. I said, I don't agree with that statement.
Yes. But I think the fact that the conversation went to that point, I just was like, oh, here we go. In my head, it was like, we have to be careful about how we talk about women's basketball in front of certain people, because people who've only watched 5 minutes of a game one time and saw one mistake are so quick to say, women's basketball sucks. It's so boring. That's why it's not on TV. And that's when I get so angry. So it wasn't necessarily that I was angry at you. I took it out on you of, we just opened a door. And listen, I made comments about Iowa too during that session of just like, the rest of the team, I don't think they would be in the top 25 without Clark. They are though, because they're holding up their own with her. Like she can't be doing everything. And with that being said, I also think it's important to know your audience, because if we're surrounded by a bunch of people who don't know women's basketball and just hear us saying negative things, they just take it and run with it. And that's where I get upset. Whereas when we're talking to friends who we know are watching the games and can see certain teams against other teams and actually can appreciate the game and what teams are good, I think that's where the change of conversation happens, or how certain things are framed. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
I think you're right. And I think it's sad, because I can't wait for women's basketball to get to a point where I don't always have to be saying that everyone's good and everyone's so great, so that people, mostly men, don't take it and run with it when I say one negative thing about a team.
I absolutely agree. And it's like when a women's basketball player airballs, everyone has a conversation about it. And they just make blanket statements of, oh, I don't watch women's basketball because they airball. But if a man airballs, nothing is ever said about it. So it just is it's just overseen and it's not an issue. So that's to the point you just made. Like, yeah, I cannot wait till we get to that point. Like, I don't want to tiptoe around people and say honest opinions about certain teams because everyone should be educated on it. And I know that's not realistic, but that's why I get fired up.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I can't wait until there's nuance around it, where when I make a sweeping statement, like they would be nothing without them, that someone would be like, yeah, there's such a discrepancy between the top players and everyone else. I'm going to watch what I say a little bit more.
And again, I'm sorry. I went in the car and was like, I'm so mad at you, because I was still seeing red and just annoyed by the whole situation. And it brings me back to, senior year of high school. I still vividly remember this conversation because, again, it just drives me insane. This is when UConn was in their glory days, winning all these games. And I was sitting next to this kid, a boy in my class, who we were talking about basketball. He knew I was going to college to play basketball. We were just having a conversation. He continued to say how he thought our boys basketball team at Indian Hills, if they played UConn at the time, could beat the UConn women's basketball team.
Yeah. I mean, the confidence of young men, of men in general, of mediocre men in general, is astonishing. Like the tweet that I saw this week that said 1 in 8 men think they could win a point against Serena Williams.
Of course.
Are you kidding me?
I was just sitting there arguing with this kid, and I'm like, why am I arguing with stupidity? Honestly, like that's what it feels like. It's like there's no winning this argument because you just think what you think with no evidence to back this up. And why am I going to get red in the face and all upset for something that I'm just never going to get my point across to certain people?
Yes. And it's so clear that they don't watch the game. Like recently, our beloved Nuggets, our Denver Nuggets, one of their players, Michael Porter Jr.
Oh, don't even want to give him more credit where credit isn't due and say his name.
I know. He went on a podcast and the interviewer was asking him about how he was wearing the Stewie 2s, Brianna Stewart's shoes.
Yep.
And like the interviewer was really setting him up to like be like, yeah, so you're wearing these shoes. How else do you support women? And he just went off about pretty much how he doesn't. He compared the talent of women to the talent of the best ping pong player. He said that ping pong players are paid based on what people want to watch. And then he said, females want the same treatment, but it's a different sport. They're not packing out arenas and their TV deals aren't the same. You can't pay them the same thing, but there should be a way for them to make a little bit more money. Well, thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for your very intelligent take. It is so clear that you've never watched women's basketball before. It is so clear you threw on those Stewie 2s because you're a Puma athlete and someone told you to do it. It is so infuriating to hear men, and men who should know better, say things like this all the time and think they're being supportive and just not.
Yeah. And this came out before the conversation at the gym. So I was already really in a mood this week about this whole situation. Not to mention his mom played Division I for Iowa, played professionally overseas. He had 2 sisters who played Division I college basketball at Mizzou with where he went, and he still is so disrespectful towards women and the women's game.
Yes.
Mentioning how maybe it would be more excited if they lowered the rims to watch them dunk. Meanwhile, this man is 6'8". I did not stutter there. 6'8", almost 7 feet tall. All I ever see him do is shoot the 3.
Yes.
He doesn't go down low. He doesn't do anything. He just shoots 3s every time the ball is in his hand. It's going up. I mean, you've complained about that in the past, and I usually love the 3-pointer, so I never got upset. But after hearing him make a dumb comment like that, now I'm just over it. I'm annoyed. The disrespect is what really frustrates me. And we listened, for reference, for some background. We listened to that whole podcast because we saw the video on Instagram of the clip, and it's very easy to get sound bites from something and just take it and run with it and be like, oh, they're a horrible person. And everyone has right to their opinion. I'm not saying he's a horrible person. I shouldn't say that. But we listened to the whole podcast.
We were trying to give him the benefit of the doubt.
We were like, maybe it was just a bad soundbite.
No, it got worse. It got worse.
But another person who just doesn't respect the women's game. And I think there's so many NBA players out there who over the years have started to show support for the WNBA, or you'll see them at college games. Steph Curry being one of them. Kobe Bryant, I feel like, started that charge when he was still alive. And to then hear someone say something so negative just is really upsetting to know that there's still that negativity out there.
Yes, and this is the exact reason why when we go to the gym, we have to not say negative things because we already have enough people saying negative things. And I just think to myself, like, how lucky he is, how lucky that person in high school is who said that comment to you, that you were born a boy. Like, how lucky you are that you were born a boy, and that our society happens to celebrate at this moment in time the talent of men and not celebrate as much the talent of women, although I do think that's changing. And how lucky he is to have a mom who supported him through his back surgeries, to have an NBA deal where they have trainers who can give you the best rehab that you could ever ask for. He was making points that this is a different sport. And again, I want to stay away from talking about him, although I have so many digs, and I'm just going to throw one in there. The only difference between his sport and the women's game is that in women's games, they actually play defense and they pass the ball, because he has never passed the ball in his entire life. Okay, I'm done.
Okay.
But it's not a different sport. And I think this is a bigger problem about how men are perceived in society and how women are perceived in society. And for some reason, we place a higher value, and it's not just because people find it more interesting, because we're seeing time and time again when women's college games are put on TV and there's an NBA game put on TV, people are tuning into the women's game. So you cannot say it's about money, because we're proving that we can make the money. So what you're not, well, not you personally, Danielle, what people are not going to say, it's that they value men more than women. And I even had it myself for a while, right? Like, it's almost like this internalized sexism that we grow up with, where we value men's opinions more. I've valued men's opinions more. And it's part of the society that we grow up in, and we have to do this part in dismantling it.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. And when I was looking at schools to play basketball at for college, I clearly remember that at the time I would go to the women's games when I was in high school and looking to go to Moravian. And I would also, the men's and women's games were back to back. And I could see that clearly so many more people went to the women's games. And I'm not kidding. That's one of the reasons I went there, because I just thought that was such a cool thing to be a part of and something that I wasn't used to. And it does make a huge difference. And the other thing I wanted to say is Holly Rowe was at the South Carolina UConn game today, and I just heard her speaking about the Nebraska-Iowa game and then talking about South Carolina UConn game, and just saying how it was a great day for sports in the country today and a great day for women's sports. And it just made me think, like, she's just being so positive right now. And obviously that's her job. She's a sports broadcaster, and literally I don't think that woman sleeps, because she's at every game. Every time I turn on the TV, she's announcing. She's at game. But I just loved how excited she was talking about the two games today. And I'm like, this is the energy that I need. Yes. And I need to see more of that. And I think we've come a long way. The WNBA only started as of 1996.
And so those games weren't even on TV.
Right.
Like they started, but those games weren't being televised.
Right. Like we were 4 or 5 years old at that time. So it's taking more time than I would like, but we are getting there. We're making strides, and there are people invested. And yes, there's some people out there who are going to say dumb stuff no matter what. I think part of our mission needs to be hyping the game up, and especially around certain people, just being careful about how we frame certain things, because as we know, people like to run with negativity, just take it and run with it, even if they don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
And like I said, I could be wrong. Would love to hear if people had other opinions about this, because this is just my opinion and me trying to protect the game and wanting to excite people about it. And I think it's important to talk about the other side too. So
yeah, and we've had this conversation a few times now, and we didn't even know if we wanted to talk about this on the podcast, because we were like, do we even want to give this person more airtime? But again, I think it speaks to a bigger problem, and I think there's so many times where we have conversations with people in our life who don't really understand women's sports. I know that I want to call out people, but I'm trying to think, like, how can I call them in and be like, actually, there's great players everywhere. And if you turn on any game, you're going to find someone that you like, and they play really, really well. And women have the fundamentals down to a T. The other thing that was said on the podcast was they were like, it's a boring game to watch. It's not going to get as much. It's not as exciting. But then they went on to talk about Nikola Jokic, who's MVP, plays for the Nuggets, and how he's so good because he played overseas first and he has all the fundamentals down.
Yep.
So again, it's not about the fundamentals. It's really just like, hey, how can I invite you in to actually watch the game, so then you can form an opinion that actually has some facts about it, around it. I think if we can do that more, and I could tame my anger when I hear people say things that are uninformed or what I feel is very unintelligent, I think it'll go a long way. And I cannot wait for the day where we can have nuanced conversations and we're not just like totally having to defend ourselves all the time.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to bring in the people who are in our lives that are men and do advocate for the women's game. Like, my dad coached me growing up. He always said, I love coaching girls. I think fundamentally they're so much better. They listen. They want to do well. I always talk about him loving UConn. He watches the games. He's always texting us about other games going on, and just overall as an advocate of the game. Matt Savage, one of our really close friends.
Yes.
He is such an advocate of WNBA, NCAA women's basketball. We're always texting him about different things. He loves to watch. He loves to have a conversation about it. He'll send us things all the time if we haven't seen it. Another great person that we need people like that. And your dad was a huge advocate of women's sports as well. It's important that more men are having these conversations and advocating for the game.
If you're a man and you love women's sports, you should be telling everyone else about it as well, and calling people in, which I think, shout out our friend Matt Savage. He has sisters, but he doesn't even have a daughter, which I think is always like, oh, I figured it out once I had a daughter. He doesn't have a daughter. He has a son, and he just gets it because he sees the game for what it is. And he took the time to watch it, right? He didn't just make a sweeping assumption. He didn't listen to what his friends said.
Right.
And I think that is so important. And we have men in our lives who are really passionate and really supportive, and we need more of that. And we need people to stick up and say something. And I wish I even said more at the gym.
I mean, I sat there in the corner not saying anything because I was so upset.
Because it becomes paralyzing.
Right. And so I wish I said something too. I do want to acknowledge the men in our lives who are advocates and have been advocates. And I wouldn't be where I am today or my whole career without my dad being in my corner and taking me to games and watching college games with me and bringing me. So that is huge and something that needs to be acknowledged, because without that, I wouldn't have been as successful as I was or as into it as I was. So I just think it's really important to acknowledge that, and your dad as well.
Yes. Yes. So all that to say, we're angry.
And yes, angry that we still have to have these conversations and to protect the game as much, when it should speak for itself, but we need more people to watch so that they can realize that on their own terms, not just say things that they hear other people say. So hopefully we continue to grow in that regard and more people continue to watch. So as we always say, watch women's sports.
Yes. Danielle, as we wrap up today, what are you looking forward to next week?
So this coming week, talked a little bit earlier about Iowa and Caitlin Clark being 8 points away from breaking those all-time scoring record. She and Iowa will play Michigan this Thursday. and really looking forward to that game. Might not be able to watch it live because it's on Peacock, but
so annoying.
I know, but hopefully we can see some replays from that. But if you have Peacock, you can stream it live. And then just a reminder, we talked about it a few weeks ago, Sabrina Ionescu and Steph Curry. The 3-point contest will take off on Saturday, February 17th at 8 p.m. Eastern on TNT.
Can I just say one thing about this?
Sure.
Don't you feel like it's a little bit of a lose-lose for Sabrina Ionescu?
Yes and no. I think it's giving a spotlight to women's basketball that might not always be there, and she could be him. I know your point is she's going to be shooting from the women's line and him the men's line. But,
which I think she should.
Right. But I know people are,
yes,
your point is people are going to say something regardless.
She wins from the women's line. She always shoots from there. She should be shooting from there. People are going to say she's shooting too close. Even if she shot from the men's line and she won, it would still be something, right? And then if she loses, it's like, yeah, of course, because women stink. And I just feel like it's just a lose. And you're right. The exposure is great. And I think that's what I need to focus on.
Yes.
But I do worry I'm just not going to go into the
Steph
comments
Curry
section.
is coming from a great place when
True.
he brought this on. So he's not coming from a place, oh, I just need to prove to people that I'm better. I think, yeah, the competitiveness is there with him. But he's coming from a good place of, yeah, let's battle this out. You currently hold the record for the 3-point contest. So let's battle it out NBA All-Star Weekend. I think it's going to be fun.
Yeah, I hope I get proven wrong. And I hope it's just like a fun two people who are very competitive going head to head, and we'll see what happens.
Yes. But that's what I'm looking forward to. How about you, Carolyn? What do you have coming up this week?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to more softball. So the Clearwater Invitational for softball is happening this weekend. I really like the Clearwater Invitational because it has some of the best teams facing off early in the season. So for me, it gives me like a little bit of a deeper look into what are we actually working with? What are the lineups? Who are the pitchers? Who should I be watching for the rest of the season? Stanford will be there. Florida State will be there. Utah, Auburn, Georgia, Oklahoma State, LSU. Like everyone you might want to see is going to be playing each other. The weather's great. The fans are great. So it's a really fun one to watch if you have the time.
Sounds like we're going to need some multiple TVs set up.
I know. As we continue to do this podcast, I'm like, we need multiple TVs. We need multiple streaming services so that we can consume all of the women's sports and report back.
I'll remember you said that when I asked for a new TV. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to that as well. And with that, that's it for this week. We will see you next week on Women's Sports Weekly. In the meantime, watch women's sports. Keep sending us topics you want us to cover on Instagram at Women's Sports Weekly Pod. Thanks for joining us.